For years, the world believed Prince Harry would stand by Meghan Markle no matter the cost. He walked away from his home, his titles, even his own family, all to protect her. But now, something has shifted. Inside royal circles, a quiet tension is growing. And this time, it isn't Meghan at the center of it. It's Harry. Because in a decision that shocked people closest to the palace, Harry recently made a move that blindsided Meghan and exposed deep fractures in their marriage. Fractures that can no longer be hidden. According to those familiar with the situation, Harry says it all traces back to one moment, one email, one single sentence that cracked open the reality behind their relationship. And once you understand what that sentence really implied, the entire story changes. This isn't a marriage with small cracks, it's a marriage built on a fault line, and the shaking has finally started. So let's rewind to where the first fracture appeared. February 2018. The public had no clue anything unusual was happening. But behind palace walls, something didn't add up. Prince Harry had sent an email, an official message that later appeared in legal records. Most people brushed it off as routine, maybe even protective. But hidden inside that message was a single sentence that raised eyebrows among those who saw it. Harry wrote, "I can't begin to tell you what it will say about the institution if this isn't resolved before the baby's arrival and wedding." At first glance, it looks harmless, even sensible, but there was one massive problem. In February 2018, there was no baby.no public announcement, no clues to no whispers, nothing. And that is where everything begins to unravel. So why was Harry talking about the baby's arrival months before the wedding, when no pregnancy had ever been announced? There were only two ways to interpret it. Either Harry was imagining a future child out of hope, or he genuinely believed a baby was already on the way at that time. And from the tone of that email, the urgency, the pressure, the almost panicked wording, it didn't read like wishful thinking. It read like a man trying to fix something quietly before the world caught even a hint of it. That one sentence, hidden inside that one email, became the spark that a tiny slip that suggested a much bigger story beneath the surface. A story Harry never intended anyone to notice. Because if Meghan had told Harry that she was expecting, then suddenly everything that followed starts to fit together. Once that email made its way through palace inboxes, quiet confusion spread behind the scenes. According to people close to the situation, Harry had been told there might be a baby on the way, and Harry, emotional and protective, believed it completely. And why wouldn't he? He was in love, fiercely, blindly, wholeheartedly. But to the staff inside the palace, something didn't align. There were no medical updates, no official confirmations, no records of appointments. Nothing except Harry's repeated insistence. This needs to be settled before the baby arrives. That line echoed through late-night calls, planning meetings, and whispered conversations. It was as if the entire palace had suddenly been placed on a countdown none of them understood. And in the center of it, Harry became more frantic. He wasn't acting like the calm prince the world recognized. He was acting like a man racing the clock, a man who believed everything could collapse if the truth slipped out too soon. Every decision became immediate. Every discussion became heavy. Every delay sent him deeper into worry. And behind closed doors, the quiet question grew louder. If Meghan was expecting, why couldn't anyone else verify it? But Harry wasn't in the place to question anything that he trusted what he'd been told. He trusted the woman he loved. And that trust, that unquestioning loyalty, was about to reshape the entire direction of his life. Because the speed of Harry and Meghan's engagement shocked even the most seasoned royal insiders. People said they'd only been together a short time when Harry suddenly insisted the wedding couldn't wait. Not next year, not after careful planning. It had to happen immediately. Royal weddings are usually slow-moving machines, built through long traditions, endless approvals, and months of preparation. But this time, everything shifted into a 6-month sprint, faster than anyone inside the palace had ever seen. Staff were puzzled. Senior aides whispered behind heavy doors. Even the Queen, steady, calm, impossible to shake, asked for clarity more than once. And every time, one quiet phrase kept resurfacing. It needs to happen before the baby comes. That single line became the force driving the entire operation. It explained why decisions were rushed, why protocol bent in ways it rarely ever does, why the palace pushed forward at breakneck speed. Meghan looked serene, polished, glowing in public. Harry, on the other hand, seemed tightly wound, emotional, anxious, almost urgent. Behind the smiling photos, another picture was forming. A prince racing toward a wedding he believed had to happen. A ceremony built not on tradition or timing, but on pressure, on fear, on something he felt he had to protect. And if the baby that fueled that urgency never existed at all, then the love story he thought he was safeguarding may have been built on something else entirely. By March 2018, something strange swept through the palace halls. The whispers stopped. The frantic rush that had dominated every schedule simply dissolved. Meetings that once felt like fire drills returned to normal. Staff who had been sprinting days earlier now stood still, confused, wondering why the crisis they'd been preparing for had suddenly vanished. It was as if the entire emergency, the very thing that triggered the race to the altar, had disappeared overnight. According to quiet murmurs in royal circles, Meghan had privately told Harry she'd lost the baby, a deeply personal moment the public never heard about. But behind palace walls, people began to notice something wasn't adding up. Not even close. If she truly had been expecting in late 2017, the due date should have landed somewhere in mid-2018. Yet by the time the May wedding arrived, there were no hints, no announcements, no signs that any pregnancy had ever existed. Then came something even stranger. Harry didn't look like a man carrying grief. He looked like someone who'd just stepped out of a storm. Lighter, calmer, almost relieved. The pressure he'd put on everyone else seemed to evaporate, but the reason for that shift stayed locked behind closed doors. Staff noticed. The Queen noticed. And those who'd been closest to the situation quietly found themselves asking the same uneasy question. Was there ever a baby at all? Because when Archie was born in May 2019, nearly 2 years after the supposed early pregnancy, the timeline didn't just wobble, it collapsed completely. There was simply no way the events were connected. That's when the palace began to understand something important. The urgency that once consumed Harry may not have been based on facts, but on belief. And belief, especially when tangled with love and fear, can be one of the most powerful forms of influence in the world. But if the vanished pregnancy raised questions, Meghan's behavior raised even more. Those inside the palace began seeing a pattern, almost a strategy, in how she navigated different situations. She shifted between roles like someone choosing masks, selecting whichever one suited the moment. Mask 1. The victim. When she needed sympathy, her voice softened, her eyes widened, and she framed herself as overwhelmed or unfairly treated. It immediately triggered Harry's protective instincts. He had carried emotional scars for years, and any sign that someone close to him was hurting pulled him straight in. Mask 2. The partner. When she needed loyalty, she shifted into warmth. She became the partner who made Harry feel like it was the two of them against everyone else. Every choice turned into our decision. Every disagreement with the palace became us versus them. And Harry, already feeling distance from the institution he grew up in, naturally fell into that rhythm. Mask 3. The star. When she wanted influence, she turned on the glow. The confidence, the charm, the way she dominated every room without even trying. It wasn't just presence, it was intention. That shine helped her carve out a place inside the royal story that no newcomer had ever managed to create. And Harry shifted with every mask she wore. When she cried, he jumped to defend her. When she connected, he followed her lead. When she dazzled, he faded into the background. People around him began to notice the transformation, that a prince who once felt steady and grounded now reacted emotionally to every change in Meghan's tone. She had discovered exactly which emotional switches guided his choices, and she used them with remarkable precision. Whenever staff raised concerns, whenever tradition got in the way, whenever someone paused or questioned a detail, Meghan's timing always arrived like clockwork. Emotion became her tactic. Love became her tool. And Harry found himself fighting battles he didn't fully understand, driven by feelings he couldn't walk away from. The trap wasn't physical. There were no locks, no bars. It was emotional, soft, powerful, wrapped around him until he couldn't separate affection from pressure. By the time May 2018 arrived, nothing could stop the momentum. Whether the early pregnancy story had disappeared or not didn't matter anymore. The wedding machine was already in motion. The Queen had given her approval. The chapel was reserved. The world's attention was fixed on the date. But within the palace, no one forgot what had brought them to this moment. They remembered Harry's panic. They remembered the rush. They remembered the impossible timeline that left them no room to question anything. And they remembered something else. The baby that once dictated every decision simply vanished from all discussion. And when Meghan walked down the aisle, poised, stunning, perfectly composed, many inside the royal circle didn't feel joy at all. They felt a quiet chill, because they saw something Harry couldn't yet see. He wasn't stepping into a fairy tale, he was stepping into a marriage born from urgency, not certainty. While the world admired the horses, the flowers, the tiaras, the cheering crowds, palace insiders saw a different story entirely. They saw a prince who had been guided down a path he didn't fully understand, a timeline that never added up, a crisis that dissolved the moment the wedding was secured. To them, it was a wedding driven by strategy, a wedding carried by momentum, a wedding that had become unstoppable once the emotional pressure pushed it forward. And the hardest truth? Harry believed he had won, that he believed he had protected his new family, he believed he had made the right decision. But he didn't realize, not yet, that the urgency disappeared the moment he said, "I do," because its purpose had already been served. The quiet trap had fully closed, and the price of that rushed choice would follow him for years. When Harry and Meghan eventually walked away from the palace, the world assumed they were running toward freedom, sunshine, wide open space, a mansion worth more than most royal estates. It looked like the dream escape, the perfect chance to begin again. Harry even told friends he finally felt free, but freedom without direction can become its own kind of cage. And in Montecito, everything shifted. The palace rules were gone, yes, but so were the routines, the responsibilities, the structure, and the identity Harry had known his entire life. He never understood how much those invisible royal boundaries were holding him together, until the moment they disappeared. At first, California felt like a rush. New deals, new projects, new headlines, a fresh start under the West Coast sun. But slowly, something in Harry began to fade. People within the Sussex circle started whispering the same thing. Harry seemed withdrawn, short-tempered, restless, like a man who sprinted toward freedom only to realize he had no idea where he was supposed to run next. Meghan, meanwhile, flourished. She owned the spotlight, interviews, cameras, production meetings, branding talks. Every room lit up for her. Harry didn't, that he wasn't the prince anymore, that he wasn't the hero, that he wasn't the rebel shaking up the institution. He felt like a background character in the story he thought he was leading. And inside that massive Montecito mansion, with walls higher than most castle gates, the silence grew louder than any freedom they'd gained on the outside. Because everything circles back to that single moment, point one email, point one sentence, point one slip Harry never realized would rewrite the rest of his life. Before the baby's arrival and the wedding, it wasn't a warning, that it wasn't a reminder. It was the first domino. It was never just a sentence, that it was a warning, quiet, subtle, almost invisible. Yet it carried the truth long before Harry realized what it meant. Inside that single line lived everything he'd been running from. The urgency, the pressure, the fear of losing control, the force that slowly pushed him away from the life he understood and into a future he didn't recognize. And the real heartbreak wasn't that someone misled him, it was that he misled himself. He wanted to believe love could fill every empty space left by years of lost. He wanted to believe someone finally chose him. Not his status, not the image, not the story, just him. But sometimes the harshest illusion is the one you create in your own heart. Today, the world still watches the glitter, the cameras, the polished smiles. Yet beside that spotlight, Harry walks in a quieter shadow, not as a prince shaped by destiny, but as a man replaying the moment everything quietly changed. That sentence he once wrote, it wasn't just paperwork, that it wasn't routine. It was the truth he couldn't see then, and the truth that still follows him now. Cracks in a relationship don't begin with a headline. They begin with a moment, a feeling, a sentence that refuses to fade, no matter how far you run. And Harry's sentence, it has echoed through every choice he's made since. The fairy tale has softened. The illusion grows thinner by the day. And now the world waits, not for a scandal, but for the moment Harry stops pretending and finally confronts the truth he has been avoiding for years.